So now we're going to be factoring some trinomials that are not perfect square trinomials that have a leading coefficient of 1. Alright, so just to refresh our memory a little bit, let's talk about what factoring is again. So remember, whenever I'm factoring, I want to take a trinomial here and I want to break it down into two binomials that are multiplied together. Okay, they have to be multiplication in the middle of them. So whenever we're looking at a trinomial, standard form is going to be ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so a, b, and c are all constants, and then we have our quadratic term and then what we call our linear term. Alright, now how do we factor these when they're not perfect square trinomials? This is the question because we haven't looked at this yet. You may remember some of this from Algebra 1, but we're going to review. Alright, so let's take a closer look at this factor. It's already factored. I have my binomial. So if I were to multiply this out, so do some double distributing, I end up getting this trinomial down here. Okay, this is the trinomial I end up with. Now I want us to look at this trinomial and see where stuff comes from. What is creating this x squared? Okay, what is creating this x squared? Well, whenever I multiply x times x, I'm getting this x squared. So it looks like first times first gives me the first term here. Okay, what's creating this 6 in the back? Well, whenever I do 2 times 3, I end up with this 6. So it looks like last times last gives me the last term. Alright, so we following so far? First times first gives me the first term. Last times last gives me the last term. But what about the middle? Okay, and this is always the trickiest part. The middle is created when I do 2 times x and then I do x times 3. So 2 times x gives me 2x. X times 3 gives me 3x. And when I add those together, I get 5x. Okay? I like to call that my inners and my outers. Okay? So, just to review, the first term is created by first times first. The last term is last times last. And the middle term is going to be my inners plus my outers. Okay? Inners plus my outers. Okay, so this is just reiterating my point here. Okay, so how do we get the middle term? Again, m times x gives me mx, that's right here. N times x gives me nx, that's right here. And the middle term is caused when I add the coefficients of those and I tack on the x. So again, the middle term is always my inners plus my outers. Okay, so this middle term is inners plus outers. This is going to be super important, so we really need to understand that, okay? So this middle term is created by doing the product of the inners, so inners multiplied together, outers multiplied together, and then added, so the sum of those two. And I want you to also notice something here about the last term. The last term is always the last two multiplied together, and see how the inners and the outers sum together compares to the product of the last term. Alright, so we're looking for factors of the last number that will add or subtract depending on the problem to give me the inside. Okay, so factors of the last term that will add or subtract to give me the inside. Alright, so let's give this a try. Okay, so remember we're always going to be factoring into two binomials. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up. Now, the numbers that go here are always the factors of the first term. Well, how do I make x squared? The only possibilities are x squared times 1 and x times x. Now, obviously we want to choose that guy. So we're going to do x times x. Now, the last terms depend on the factors of our last term in our trinomial. Well, what are the factors of 8? Well, the factors of 8 are 1 and 8 and 4 and 2. Now remember, they have to add or subtract to give me the middle term here. So let's go ahead and find the sum. That's going to give me 9 and that's going to give me 6. So which pair do you think I'm going to use? Well, quite obviously I'm going to use this one because this matches up with my middle term here. Alright, so I'm going to use 4 and 2, and for right now It's just plus plus because I need to make a positive 6. Okay? Now, a quick, fast way to check to make sure I did this right, I check my inners and my outers. This gives me 4x. This gives me 2x. When I add them together, I get 6x, which is my middle term. So I know that I did it right. Now, of course, you can multiply it completely back through, and you would see that I end up with the trinomial that I started with. Okay, so if you're unsure, you should always check your answer completely by double distributing back through and checking to make sure it matches with the original trinomial. Alright, so what signs go where? This is the toughest part, alright? Trying to decide where the signs go, what the sign should be, alright? So remember, we always have our binomials, alright? Doesn't matter what we're factoring into, we're always going to have these binomials as long as I'm dealing with the trinomial. Now, the key here is this last guy, okay? This last sign is going to help me tremendously, alright? So, if this guy is a plus, that means my signs are going to be the same, okay? Now, that makes sense, right? Because remember, we get the last term by multiplying this guy and this guy. Well, plus times plus gives me plus, and minus times minus gives me plus. So those are the two ways I can make a positive sign. So, anytime this back guy is a plus, that means my signs will be the same. So that's easy. That's the easy case. In just a second, we're going to look at when it's a minus. Alright, so whenever I have a minus in the back, my signs are going to be different inside my parentheses. Okay, which makes sense because what's the only way I can make a negative number? Well, that's a negative times a positive, or a positive times a negative. So whenever I have a minus in the back here, whenever my constant is negative, I know that my signs inside my parentheses are going to be different. Now, trying to decide where the negative or where the positive goes is going to be determined by my inners and outers. Okay? So, the product of your inners and outers is going to tell you, it looks like a little monkey face, is going to tell you where the negative sign goes. Okay? The biggest product, okay, this is important, write this down. Biggest product gets the sign of B. Okay? Now, what does that mean? That means when I do my inners, I get a product, right? And then I do my outers, I get a product. Whichever product is biggest, discluding the signs that are there, that's where you shove this sign in front of B. Okay? So, different, biggest positive. Different, biggest negative. Alright? Different, biggest positive. Different, biggest negative. That's exactly what goes through my head every single time I factor something. Okay? This sign tells me if they're the same or different. This sign tells me the sign of the biggest product. Alright, so let's actually try it out. Okay? So I'm always going to have my two parentheses. Alright? I want the factors of 10. So the factors of 10 are 10 and 1, 2 and 5. Now, my factors have to add or subtract to give me my middle term. Well, that's going to be 2 and 5, right? So I'm going to go ahead and put my factors of x squared, x and x, factors of 10, 2 and 5. This is what I do first. Now, this tells me same sign, both negative. Same sign, both negative. Boom, I'm done. Now let's check. This gives me negative 2x. This gives me negative 5x. And when I add those guys up, I get a negative 7x, which is my middle term. So I know I did it right. So here is my answer, and I am done. Alright, so once again, we draw our parentheses. I need the factors of x squared, so that's x and x. I need the factors of 4, so that's 4 and 1, 2 and 2. Now I need those to add or subtract to give me 3. Okay, so the ones that are going to add or subtract to give me 3 are going to be 4 and 1. Alright, this guy right here tells me different signs, biggest product, negative. Different signs, biggest product, negative. So when I do this, I get 4x When I do this guy, I get 1x. So which of those is bigger? Well, that's this one. So the 4 right here, I can't put it in front of the x here. Okay? See how that doesn't make sense? You can't put a sign in front of this guy. So my sign, my negative, has to go right there. Okay? Which leaves me with a plus here. Alright, so let's just retrace our steps again. Different signs, biggest product negative. So 4x, 1x, 4x is bigger. That way I have to stick the sign in front of the 4. I can't put it in front of the x, so you have to put it in front of the 4. Alright, so now when I checked my inners and outers, I get negative 4x plus a 1x, which, hooray, adds up to negative 3x, so I know that I factored correctly. Alright, so let's do it again. So we draw our binomials here. I want the factors of x squared, so that's x and x. Factors of 8, you don't always have to write it, but 8 and 1, it's good to write it. 4 and 2. I want to add or subtract to give me 7. Well, the only ones that are add or subtract to give me 7 are going to be 8 and 1. Alright, now I have to decide. Different signs, biggest product positive. Different signs, biggest product positive. So I'm going to check my inners and outers. I got 8x, I got a 1x. So this guy right here, my 8x is bigger, therefore the sign here has to go in front of the 8, plus, minus, okay? So remember, different signs, biggest product positive. And when I check my inners and outers, my biggest product here, my inners, that positive sign goes right there. And now I can go ahead and check my work. Negative 8 or a positive 8 times x is positive 8x. This is going to be a negative 1x. So when I add those together, I get a 7x. So I know that I did it correctly, and this is the correct factored form of my trinomial.
Alright guys, now give these a try.